have been at least a couple innovations that SeedSigner, I can't say we pioneered, but that we have popularized most effectively. This idea of a stateless signer that isn't intended to store private keys persistently is something that we weren't the first to do that, but I feel very comfortable saying that we were a big part of that concept being popularized, that it's now been implemented in several of the commercial hardware wallets. The other thing was air gapping. We were not the first by any means to offer air gap, but I think the adoption of SeedSigner has pushed the industry forward to start putting out more of air gap solutions. Like Blockstream Jade was initially released without QR exchange or air gapped transfer of information being available, and they implemented it after they saw the degree of interest that SeedSigner was generating. And this may be controversial, but I think we might not have seen the cold card queue without SeedSigner having achieved the popularity that it did. I'm sure NVK would hate to hear that if he hears it, but I think that's a real thing. What's exciting about SeedSigner is that individual Bitcoiners still continue to discover it, and the project resonates with them. And there's not, at that level, there isn't the interference of a company or a media platform or anything like that. They can read about it and learn about it for themselves, and if it makes sense for their cold storage situation, they can give it a try, and if they like it, they share it with others. Some of these dynamics can slow us down a little bit, but they can't stop us entirely. So I love that aspect.
Welcome to Your Bitcoin Story podcast, where we dive into the fascinating journeys of individuals who have dived deep down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. I'm your host, Gigi, and today we have the pleasure of having SeedSigner back on the show. SeedSigner needs not much introduction if you haven't been in the Bitcoin space for some time. SeedSigner is an air-gap Bitcoin signing device. You can build it with off-the-shelf tools. It's an air-gap Bitcoin transaction signing device. And you can do that all for less of $50. Now, if you're not someone who likes to tamper themselves and likes to buy pre-built devices, then you're in luck, because they also have authorized partners, which you can find on seedsigner.com. And if you haven't seen them, there has been some new upgrades since the last time we had Seed on the show. There's been a premium collection that came out, which I will show to the viewers just in a second. And of course, if you want to hear Seed's own story on how he got involved in Bitcoin and how his journey's been so far, then you can backtrack to episode 25 and you can hear the full story from the man himself. But today, let's dive into the conversation of everything that's happened since we had Seed on the show, more or less this time last year. And with that being said, Seed, welcome back on the show.
Hey, I'm honored to be the first repeat guest on your pod.
It's a pleasure. It's only been a matter of time. I think I've repeated close 70 episode plus with closing the show. We would love to have you back. The journey carries on going, but nobody saw a return of anyone. So I guess it's only right to have someone back on, and I couldn't have thought of a better person than yourself, since in the last year, there's been a lot of things that happened, and especially for the Seedside project it's been a few months now, but about summertime, there's been a lot of controversy and a lot of debates and misinformation going around. And I kind of just wanted to have you back on the show to discuss those things. But before we do, I wanted just to show everybody the premium device that I was telling you about is right here in my hands. And I've had the pleasure of buying it from SeedSigner himself this summer at BTC Prague. And I must say, congratulations, Seed, for the metal device. I mean, this feels, let's throw some heat back at CoinKite. It looks much more premium than the plastic calculator in my hands. Nothing bad about CoinKite, but this feels much more premium. And yeah, it's just amazing to see how the project's evolved. As I said in the introduction, you can build these devices from off-the-shelf tools and for a mere less than $50. But if you spend a few more dollars, this is definitely a way to go. And I just wanted to give you a big congratulations on the evolution of the project.
So that device, for those who are less familiar with SeedSigner, is probably the most premium incarnation of a SeedSigner that you can get your hands on. They're made by a very talented metal worker and machinist who, as I understand it, is French and has a background in fine metalwork. The mere existence of those is the outgrowth of the project's permissive licensing. Everything that has to do with the project, from the 3D printable enclosures to the OS that we run on top of, and to the software that makes up the kind of SeedSigner app level, is MIT licensed, permissively open source. And so the funny part about how that collaboration arose is that the individual who makes those is himself a very big Monero enthusiast. And SeedSigner is a Bitcoin-only project, but we believe in freedom. So with our software being licensed the way it is, there was a group of individuals who were forking SeedSigner to create a Monero-compatible version of SeedSigner. And this particular individual with these amazing metalwork skills was extremely excited about the Monero-enabled fork of SeedSigner, that he wanted to leverage his talent to create, kind of a premium experience with the hardware set that we used. And he DM'd me on Twitter one day and offered to send me one. And it's a really impressive. I can't really overstate it. It transforms, what SeedSigner is almost to the physical experience of using an Apple product. And so while I myself am not involved with Monero or other things outside of Bitcoin, it's really kind of a fun aspect of the story that this probably wouldn't have happened had our licensing not been as open as it is. So it's just a great example of being free and open source leading to great things.
No, I couldn't agree more. Seed, I mean, FOSS is the way to go. And just with the beauty of having open source, so many things can spring out of it. This just been another fantastic use case example of it. And who knows what happens in the future.
Yeah, who knows what happens in the future.
So we'll see. Whatever we create today will happen in the future, right? So we got to keep on building. But yeah, right. Seed, so I wanted to kind of see, how have you been personally since we last recorded? We had a brief interaction at BTC Prague where I had the pleasure of seeing this device in person, and I had to have one for myself. But apart from that, we didn't have too much time. It was out at the Parker trailer at the food stands, and I met your son as well, which was awesome. But how have you been since we last spoke? It's been a pretty crazy year, to say the least. What's been some big things on your end?
So Prague was a good experience to meet other Bitcoiners in there. I would be remiss if I didn't comment that I was a little disappointed in the organizers of the conference for not allowing myself or anyone else from the project to present anywhere near the main stage or be involved in the main event of the conference. I don't want to belabor that too much, but it's kind of this unfortunate example of some participants in the industry gatekeeping what they might perceive as an open source device that you can build it yourself that competes with their interests. And I think that's unfortunate. I think Bitcoiners should express their dissatisfaction with that. But again, I don't want to dwell on that because we're doing such exciting things with SeedSigner. So Prague was great. As you mentioned, my son accompanied me there, and that was his first time on an airplane, first time to Europe, first time out of the country. So it was really cool to experience that with him and give him a taste of the Bitcoin ecosystem. And then we spent a few days in Munich in Germany and saw some of the sites in Bavaria and southern Germany, and then went on to spend another 5 or 6 days in Switzerland and got to see the Swiss Alps and Lake Geneva, and it was a great experience. But while I'm talking about my sons, I was really excited. I have 2 sons. I brought the older one with me to the Prague conference, but I actually had both of my boys come with me to the conference in Nashville in, I think that was July.
July, yeah.
But it was really neat to be there with them, and I've personally always been inspired when I see people at Bitcoin conferences with their wife and kids or their family or some part of their family, and I wanted to start living that more as well, and making, at least for me, a more exposing them to it, because I think I do my fair share of talking bad about the government and such, but it's important to also expose your kids to the things you believe in and things that you're positive about. And Bitcoin, and especially the Bitcoin community and everyday Bitcoiners that you get to meet at conferences and meetups and events like that. I always enjoy having them around and getting them to ask questions. And we had some really great interactions at Bitcoin Park when we were in town. I brought both of them to kind of an ancillary event at Bitcoin Park. And initially, my youngest son was just bored out of his gourd, sitting there sipping on a soda or something. And there was another Bitcoiner there. I don't know the guy's name, but he makes puzzles for kids that are mempool related and related to like Bitcoin technology. And he brought over this very clever puzzle that is It consists of a bunch of translucent, differently colored blocks. And if you can kind of imagine it, it's sort of mempool.space, but as a puzzle game for kids.
Wow.
So you try to figure out the most efficient way to pack these different size, different colored blocks into what is basically a block template. And then there's like add-on challenges, like can you do it so that the colors are symmetrical, or that you only do this particular color or such. So it's never disappointing hanging around with other Bitcoiners. Yeah. So
No, it's
that's been part of my journey for the last the fun part of the journey for the summer. Yeah.
No, it's amazing. I mean, I just had a few weeks ago, I had Scott Sibley from Shamory on the pod, and he spoke about how, you know, he's been taking his two young daughters. I believe they're more or less the same age as mine. I think his oldest one is 5 years old and the youngest one is only 1.5. And they were also at Nashville. And his daughter even got involved. She on the stand, she was selling her own merchandise, these bracelets with the different
Very
blocks.
cool.
And I think that wasn't her first. The youngest one was the first, but this one was, I think, the second or the third conference already that she's been there. And with every conference, yeah, it was the third one, because she started with the bracelets and then she went to necklaces. And in Nashville, she also had keychains. So like with each conference, she's adding more stuff. And yeah, we had a nice conversation, and we spoke about how important it is to, you know, expose your kids, your sons and daughters to the Bitcoin ecosystem early on, to see, you know, the beauty of it. It's not just numbers go up, and it's not just loud ASIC machines in dad's garage mining away. There's a lot more to it, and just the fact of, you know, meeting each other, meeting people, and I think this is something that a lot of conferences are picking up. Even in BTC Prague, they had like a kids section in the expo where, you know, they're all getting together, exchanging ideas, playing some video games. I think that's super important. Because if we just backtrack a few years ago, you know, Bitcoin conferences with your wife and kids, like that was unheard of. It was just old dudes, and it was all Lambo talk, and it was all like when moon, like it was very
Sausage
different.
fest is a word that comes to mind.
I don't want to say it, but yeah, you said it for me. It was a pure sausage fest, and now it's nicer where it's you have the whole family impacted, and in some cases also like the wife. The wife realizes, wow, like as you said, you know, there's only so much the wife can listen to anti-government stuff and how everything's going to zero, and you know, you're sitting there in front of all the screens, but then seeing other people and communicating and exchanging, it's a wonderful thing. So I hope we're going to see more of that in the future. But yeah, that's certainly a highlight, and I couldn't agree more. You know, spending time with your loved ones and bringing them to this conference to share the experience, it's something truly priceless.
I think about that, and I also think I have to wonder, as Bitcoin grows, and I'm not the first person to point this out or think of it, but this idea of a cohesive Bitcoin community, or even the allure of Bitcoin focused conferences or other events, for some people becomes less and less viable, because the community grows to a point where there's so many people with different takes on Bitcoin, different perspectives on this and that. And so it's kind of like, is there an internet meetup that you go to? Like, no, it's Bitcoin has become such a large thing at this point that it's starting to splinter off into different social circles that are focused on what they think is important and this and that. So I kind of wonder how much longer the space as we know it will continue to exist, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it goes on for a while.
I think I would take the other angle of Seed, that the Bitcoin conferences, the ones that happen, most people, at least us that have been in the space for a few years, we don't go there to listen to the keynotes. It's about reconnecting and meeting new people. So I think the conferences, instead of per se conference, it will be more kind of like an annual meetup of you know, your fellow Bitcoiners from all over the world. I think that is one aspect that will take some time to wear off. But I totally couldn't agree more. We don't go to internet conferences nowadays or TV conferences. Like it wouldn't make sense. But at the same time, I still think, even though, since we're so like deep down the rabbit hole and we're like, wow, well, Bitcoin is so kind of mainstream now, especially with ETFs and everything, still to a large extent, like, I don't know how it is for you, Seed, but if I go out on the street and I start telling people about Bitcoin, nobody knows nothing. At the same time, I think we still are early. Like 15 years is some time, but also in the span of human history, it's nothing. It's not even a drop in the ocean. So I think we still have a long way to go, but we'll see. I guess maybe like Bitcoin conferences will kind of break down into segments, kind of like the new the newbie, like the new entrants that come in and it's all about how to get started, and then like the more advanced one with the devs and techie people that have been in the space for a decade, because you can't really have a mix of both. You can't make everyone happy. So maybe that's something that's going to happen, but we'll see. But going back to Nashville. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say we're already starting to see that to some degree with the more social-oriented conferences, the more technical-oriented conferences, and then there's mining conferences. There's at least one or two in the States that are focused exclusively on mining, which makes sense. But yeah, we'll see. Maybe we should start calling them Bitcoin family reunions, because we get to reconnect with all those people that we enjoy seeing and talking to.
It sounds much more healthier than some other terms. But yeah, so I guess that was the nice side of your past 12 months. Let's maybe swing to the other side with a little bit of FUD and controversy, especially on this topic of dark Skippy. Maybe some listeners have no idea what Gigi's talking about. He's jabbering away. But maybe, Seed, you could say, I mean, from your firsthand experience, how did this catch you? And like, how did all of this FUD out there impact yourself personally and the project itself?
So unfortunately, like, security disclosures are an important part of not just Bitcoin, obviously, but information security and information technology in general. Dark Skippy itself is an attack that is not necessarily a new category of attack. It's a refined version of an attack that was already known and already existed. Making disclosures about that is something that's important, and I think some aspects of it were done responsibly and with disclosures and stuff, and some aspects of it I think were maybe not done in the right way with Dark Skippy. But for people who are uninitiated and who don't know anything about it, Dark Skippy is a type of exfiltration attack, and exfiltration obviously refers to private keys, and exfiltration attacks will commonly use a pre-selected nonce, because when you sign, I'm not the deepest Bitcoiner technically, but I think I can explain this at a high level to where it's accurate and people can still appreciate it. When you create a signature for a Bitcoin UTXO, you have to select a nonce, which is supposed to be this little bit of random data that is truly random, not predictable, and it's incorporated into the signature. But if you strategically select a nonce in such a way that it's already known to someone outside of the signing process, there is a way that that process can be used to leak either portions of a private key, or if it's a large enough transaction with enough UTXOs and the signatures that accompany those, even a full private key can be leaked. And Dark Skippy was an optimization that made it possible, or showed a way to leak more information than previous attacks had demonstrated was possible in one of these exfiltration attacks. So I'm confident I'm accurate when I say that this is possible with any device that creates Bitcoin signatures that are intended to be published on the Bitcoin blockchain. And the way that the attack is executed is that the attacker deploys this malicious software that has this malicious functionality that creates or selects a pre-known nonce that is incorporated into a signature that is ultimately broadcast on the blockchain. And then people with knowledge of this pre-selected nonce can just monitor the Bitcoin blockchain that everyone has a copy of on their node. And if they're basically listening for, or keeping an eye out for, a very specific information pattern that indicates that this malicious code was run on a software that was run on a device that was used to make a transaction. I'm probably clumsily tripping through this explanation, but hopefully it makes sense enough for people who have even less understanding than I do. Dark Skippy was put out by 3 researchers. It was disclosed but not widely advertised that 2 of those 3 researchers are themselves part of a startup for a forthcoming hardware wallet. And they are trying to make a name, self-admittedly on their own part, trying to make a name for themselves in the Bitcoin space to raise their profile that will hopefully lend more credence to this new product that they are currently developing. To demonstrate, or to create a demonstration of this attack, they created a video, and the device that they chose to demonstrate this attack was a SeedSigner. It's understandable that they selected a SeedSigner because a SeedSigner is not a device that incorporates software authenticity checks in the hardware like a lot of hardware wallets. Because SeedSigner is built from off-the-shelf parts, it becomes much more important that when the user downloads the code that runs on the signer, that's the point at which it's important for them to verify that they have an authentic copy of our software. And then they load it on this device, the assembled signer. And because the device operates in a way that is isolated from other devices that connect to the internet, for that software to be compromised, somebody would have to get access to their physical device. For a lot of people, that's not a concern. They sign Bitcoin transactions in a very controlled environment and store their Bitcoin tools in places that they feel are secure. But a seed signer is a computer that will run any arbitrary code that you load onto it. It's kind of a trade-off thing. So that was the reason why they selected a seed signer to demo Dark Skippy. And unfortunately, what happens with these things is a video is posted on the internet. For a couple of days, it becomes the thing to talk about on Twitter. So tens of thousands of Bitcoiners who are less technical or don't have a complete understanding of Bitcoin or signatures or hardware wallets or SeedSigner or any of it, the impression that they just get is a video where a device that they recognize as a SeedSigner is shown to be doing something malicious that they don't quite understand, but they readily, because of the messaging and the context of it, they identify it as something bad. And the outcome of that is people think that SeedSigner is not secure or that some sort of critical fatal flaw has been discovered on SeedSigner. And that's like, just as an individual, someone among many others who contributes to the project and works on it in a great deal of my spare time, that's a tough day to wake up and check in on Twitter and see what's going on. To the researchers' credit, they did let us know in advance. We tried to counsel them on some more, what we perceived as more effective or fairer ways to disclose it, but they chose to disregard our opinions and went the way they did. I don't like the motivations behind this with them trying to build a name for themselves, and admittedly trying to do that, I think kind of muddies the waters in terms of this disclosure. But ultimately, bad day for SeedSigner. I get a lot of people in my DMs or in our Telegram chat saying, what the heck's going on? Is there some sort of critical flaw? And these are mostly from people who don't understand, who don't own a SeedSigner, or they have purchased one and haven't invested the time in understanding the model. So it's basically a process of explaining to them that the only way that this exploit can be executed is if malicious software has been installed and run on the device. So as long as when you download your SeedSigner software, whenever you run that signer, if you're confident that the code running on it is the authentic code that the people who contributed to the project have released and kind of blessed, as long as you're running that good code, this particular attack is a complete non-issue for you because it's not possible without running malicious bad software. So that's probably a digressing answer to your question, but it's been frustrating for some of us who work on SeedSigner, because not that we feel like SeedSigner should be treated with kid gloves or that it doesn't deserve scrutiny, or if there are legitimate questions about the trade-offs that we choose to make or the security model, like I am all for having that discussion. I just felt like the way this was executed, it was kind of a drive-by cheap shot PR kind of hit that left a lot of people in our community who understand what's going on feeling like why not demonstrate this? Why not raise the bar a little bit on this and demonstrate it on a commercial hardware wallet that's not just volunteers basically giving this tool to the Bitcoin community. It was a little bit of a black eye. So it's something that I feel like over time, SeedSigner is still being used. It's still being talked about. People are still building them and sharing them at meetups and, showing them off at conferences and such. So I think over time, it's just one of these things that as our Lindy continues to grow, this falls into the rearview mirror. And it's like, well, I guess that wasn't the big deal that, it was made out to be.
Yeah, no, well, I think the first thing that comes to my mind, the reason they chose maybe the SeedSigner was, as you said, there's no big company behind it. Because if it would be like, I don't know, like a Blockstream Jade or like the Cold Card by CoinKite, like there would be some legal proceedings, and I don't think they wanted to take it to that sort of height. Yeah, definitely internet.
I do want to say just real quick that like there are protections on those devices that as long as you have an authentic Cold Card or an authentic Blockstream Jade or whatever, there are software authenticity mechanisms built into those devices. As long as you have an authentic device, from the bona fide organization, that when you run code on it, it will execute a check to make sure that you're running code that's been approved by the company. Now, there are trade-offs in terms of you kind of run the code that the company gives you without maybe, checking it yourself. So there's trade-offs involved with that, but I didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought there. I just want to say it would have been a higher bar to execute it on a device that has those software authenticity controls, and maybe that was a bar that they didn't feel like trying to clear, or maybe there would have been legal concerns because these are companies we're dealing with legal teams and copyrights and stuff, and maybe they just didn't want to tread into that terrain.
No, for sure. And as I was saying, like internet likes to blow things out of proportion, and especially people that don't have the thorough knowledge on the product or, the discussion that's taking place. People straight away, the first thing is jump to panic, like, oh my God, the SeedSigner device has been, compromised and I'm going to lose my Bitcoin. But as you said, Seed, as long as you've downloaded and flashed your device with the authorized code from your guys' GitHub, there's nothing to be worried about. It's kind of misinformation that happens every single day on all sorts of subjects. Even now with elections coming up, how much misinformation, even by the leaders themselves, is being just blasted out. It's, no surprise that something like that blew out of proportion. And I also think it's kind of a low blow that they did that just to do a PR stunt for their upcoming cold storage. Do you know, have they even released their own hardware wallet, or you have no idea what those guys are doing?
I haven't. I don't even remember the name of the product. I think it was Frost something. Yeah, I don't have any information on that. What I will say is one of the more interesting conversations I had in Prague was I got to meet an individual that I'd interacted with a little bit prior to that, and he is a security researcher who specializes in hardware, and he works with a firm that has actually been retained, as I understand it, by more than one of the hardware wallet producers to do hardware audit on their devices and what vulnerabilities may exist. And he emphasized to me that when they do these audits and they release findings, the whole messaging process kind of degrades into this white team, black team, red team, blue team thing, to where it's like sports teams. Like everybody has their own hardware wallet that they use and that they're personally financially invested in, as well as just, in terms of their peace of mind, and they're mentally invested in. And they tend to emphasize what information proves that their team's the best team, and then they pile on to information that discredits, the other teams that they think are inferior to theirs. And it's just become this banal marketing carousel of, their different tools have absolute fitting and proper use cases in different situations, and there are absolutely use cases for commercial hardware wallets, and we can talk more about that. But this individual had also kind of observed the dark Skippy thing, and after his experiences and reviewing different technologies and stuff, he was kind of just sort of disillusioned that it wasn't really about the truth. It wasn't really about moving the industry forward. It was just more about selling more devices and cheering for your preferred team. And so, yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah, well, I guess I just wanted to hear it firsthand from you and how that whole experience went on. Like, I don't want to have a full 60-minute conversation about Dark Skippy, but I think it's something important to share, and especially to people, listeners who either didn't understand it or still are kind of were unsure what was that FUD all about. I think hearing from what you mentioned the last 10 minutes, it makes some sense and clarifies the waters.
Well, I really appreciate you reaching, and you, much to your credit, you were one of a small group of people who reached out to kind of ask, is this real? What's the story here? would you like an opportunity to talk about this or explain it further? And I can say that you were, as I said, one of a very small group of individuals that reached out. And the cold hard truth is that the various different hardware wallet companies sponsor and pay for a lot of things in the Bitcoin industry. Everything from individual podcasts and podcasters to booths at conferences and banners at conferences, and the money that flows into a lot of the frankly important parts of this industry comes from individual Bitcoiners through hardware wallet sales and then flows into different parts of the industry. And that's not necessarily a bad thing or a net negative, but unfortunately, in some instances, it puts into place these incentives where certain podcasters or certain people with certain media platforms just will either pile on to criticism of our project or projects similar to it, or they just kind of radio silence and
Won't touch it.
attempt to sideline projects like ours because they frankly just don't want to piss off their sponsors and they don't want to disrupt the flow of sponsorship money. So it's just kind of the way of the world. I think what's exciting about SeedSigner is that individual Bitcoiners still continue to discover it and the project resonates with them. And at that level, there isn't the interference of a company or a media platform or anything like that. They can read about it and learn about it for themselves, and if it makes sense for their cold storage situation, they can give it a try, and if they like it, they share it with others. And some of these dynamics can slow us down a little bit, but they can't stop us entirely. So I love that aspect of it.
Yeah, no, I was going to say pretty much like Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't have a dedicated marketing team, just like SeedSigner doesn't have a dedicated marketing team. You know, you go out,
Exactly.
you learn for yourself, you try it out, you like it, you recommend to your peers and friends, and you know the project flows. But yeah, it's, to be honest, I wouldn't say I'm so surprised, but like I'm surprised that more people like myself didn't reach out to you personally and, you know, offered if there's any way to help or, you know, give you a platform to come and speak. But at the same time, you know, you brought up a valid point. A lot of these bigger podcasts, they're all sponsored by majority of them by cold storage devices, and they would get into some hot waters, and some contracts would get terminated by, you know, bringing you on and discussing it.
And I don't even know that contracts would get terminated. Some of the hardware wallet makers we're on good terms with, and like I understand they have a product to sell and they do marketing and stuff in it. But if you're a small podcaster or something like that, you don't want to do anything that even might raise questions from a sponsor in some instances, you know, unless you really feel strongly about a subject. Like I don't want to give the impression that hardware wallet companies are out there like terminating contracts and stuff, but the dynamics are in play that sometimes people don't even want to, you know, create waves in the pool. And if, you know, they could have somebody else on who talks about number go up instead of somebody who might jeopardize, you know, an ad sponsor, then I can't blame them for making that choice, I guess.
True, but that goes against the ethos of Bitcoin, which, you know, when people tell me describe Bitcoin in one word, I tell them freedom. You know, Bitcoin's all about, you know, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of action. It's all about freedom. So it's kind of, you're jeopardizing your own freedom to get some extra bucks at the end of the month. Now, I understand, you know, people also have kids to feed, and, you know, a lot of depends on the sponsorship. I think sometimes, you know, it's worth taking the bullet to stand up for what's right and be sharing, especially if you have a large audience. You know, misinformation, and, you know, we've seen the Pomplianos and a bunch of others, you know, promoting a lot of projects that just rug pulled majorly, and then all they do is come out and say, oh, I'm sorry. Some didn't even own up to it, which is very shitty from their end, if I may say so.
Well, I love your integrity, and I keep looking for more of it in the Bitcoin industry. Hopefully if we look in the right places, we find it.
No, but well, I'm a strong, hopeful individual for self-sovereign individuals to be doing the right decisions. You know, I guess just with time, you know, at the end of the day, it's about you telling yourself what is your own priorities and your own, you know, integrity. And do you want to do the right thing and make a little bit less money, or do the wrong thing and, you know, try and make as much money as you can? But, you know, I live my life by dad's ethos, which I'll just finish this. You enter the world butt naked with nothing. You leave this world butt naked with nothing. So you might as well do the right thing while you're here.
Yeah, and I believe the things that we do, you know, echo or vibrate or however you want to, like, those things happen, and they've always happened. They will always have been a thing that was done. You can't undo some things that you do, but you can't undo anything that you do. It echoes through eternity, and that's the mark we leave, is really the actions that we take part in. It's funny that you bring up like some of the incentives. I was just having a conversation with somebody earlier today about the project, and relatively early on, saying like 2 or 3 years ago, I was offered some angel funding when SeedSigner was just barely getting off the ground, but there was some good buzz about it. I think before people understood really what it was and what it challenged, I think a lot of the what you would consider mainstream Bitcoin media sources were much more curious and open to it. And so there, in the early part, there was some buzz, and a venture firm offered me a bit of money to grow the idea and to take it in a direction that, a commercial direction. And I always kind of wonder, like, what would have happened had I, I don't want to shit talk for-profit companies, but I think it would have taken our project in a different direction, where we satisfy a really interesting, frankly, I think needed niche in the Bitcoin space. A few niches, really. Like, one, cold storage devices, hardware, are ubiquitously not available throughout the world. I'm an American, and I'm blessed to be in a trade environment where I could buy almost any hardware wallet I would want to. I can afford it. And beyond that, it's, a few clicks away on a website, and they would probably deliver it to my front door. That may not be the best way to purchase a hardware wallet, but the convenience facet of it is there. But there are people in parts of the world that they literally can't get, like in Russia right now. Feel however you feel about the conflict with Ukraine, but a lot of people in Russia have trouble getting access to certain devices or certain commercial products because there are sanctions that are being exercised against Russia at this point. And people who live in Russia may not agree with the war. They may be on one side or the other, but the plain truth of it is they don't have access to certain things because of the ramifications of the conflict. And SeedSigner is something that they can presumably still have access to, because there are, more than 100 million Raspberry Pis that are already in circulation around the world that can be used to build a SeedSigner. It's a device that offers, a user experience that's on par with a commercial hardware wallet, that, once you understand the trade-offs, offers some really compelling security assurances to people, and people who don't have access to those devices, or people who in Iran, you may not want to signal that you're interfacing with Bitcoin. Or in China, it's not so much, I've learned from speaking with people who live in China, it's not so much fear of reprisal from the central government of China, it's the corruption in the system, that once it becomes known that you're interfacing with Bitcoin, you don't have to worry about the Chinese Communist Party coming after you. It's the local police station who will come to your home and invent a crime as a reason to seize your assets. SeedSigner is an option for people to acquire these parts that are not Bitcoin specific quietly, and build something in the privacy of their own home that, isn't signaling to people around them that they're saving with Bitcoin or otherwise interfacing with Bitcoin. I don't want to digress too much on that stuff, but yeah, we feel like SeedSigner fills a very unique and needed freedom niche within the Bitcoin ecosystem.
You brought up some really important aspects regarding having the anonymity and the peace of mind that nobody literally knows that you're building your own Bitcoin device to, keep your Bitcoin safe, which in some part of the world, as you mentioned, Russia, which I've been living for the last 6 months, even if I wanted to get some of these hardware wallets, I can't get them shipped here. Like, no DHL, FedEx, like nothing delivers here. So you literally can't get it, even if you want to pay more. And with SeedSigner, just as doing some prep research for today's recording, AliExpress, as some listeners may know, Russia has very good relations with China, and their trade is huge between the two countries. And with AliExpress, you can get things delivered within a mere 3, 4, 5 days. And I did a quick calculation of getting your SeedSigner, the camera, the board, everything apart from the 3D printed case or the metal case if you want to go for it, but just the actual device, it would cost me $35. So even less than the $50, which we talked about. And nobody knows that you're building your own device. And I think, that should be the true ramification of FOSS and, the freedom tech. You shouldn't, no matter where you live, what your political situation is, or what the government says you can or can't do, you should have the freedom to build your own tech and store your Bitcoin, which is the number one priority. And I can't believe, we're in 2024, we've had so many exchange collapses, and yet still so many people hold their coins on Binances and Krakens and Coinbases. I mean, like, how many times, how many cycles of failure do we need to see for people to take it seriously? But I think also, on the other hand, one thing I'm realizing in some of like what we call the third world countries, and even to a certain extent, I've come across some people here in Russia where they treat their Binance account as a digital bank. It's like, oh, I keep all my stuff there because I know it's there. I can keep it there. And I'm like, guys, it's not a digital bank. It's an exchange with zero guarantees. And tomorrow you could log into your exchange and all you see is a 404 page, and there is no call center. There's no ramification. And I don't know, how do we get past this hurdle of people getting, there's only so much yelling you can do, get your coins off exchanges, yet still people do it every day. What's your take on that, Seed?
People holding their own keys is just something that all of us should be, all of us as Bitcoiners should be on board. There's actually been a dust up lately about Michael Saylor and comments that he made in an interview about cold storage. I've been paying real close attention to that. I think to some degree over the next day or two, you could say recanted or clarified his statements, or however you want to word it. But I think, like, the ability to truly own your money and take it to the grave and hold it in such a way that it makes it really hard for someone to steal it from you. That's one of the primary reasons why we all signed up for Bitcoin. And cold storage is basically, it's just a better way to do that. Whether you use a hardware wallet or you use a SeedSigner or use an air-gapped computer, whatever there are advantages and disadvantages to each approach. But it's basically just a way for you to hold your own money more securely, such that you're not walking around with private keys, on a phone in your pocket, which is extremely risky, depending on who knows that you may own Bitcoin or such that, or giving you access to multi-sig, which is probably the most theft and seizure resistant way to hold Bitcoin. Yeah, I think I would kind of put a pin on this sort of larger conversation that we're having about the Bitcoin industry and private keys and cold storage, is that I hope that more people who have a platform and who stand at some degree of prominence in the Bitcoin ecosystem would be more positive about our project, even if it impacts their relationships or their bottom line. And some people who do have stature in the Bitcoin ecosystem have been willing to say that. Like Samson Mao has referred to SeedSigner as, quote, critical Bitcoin infrastructure, which I think is, it's not the only way to hold private keys, but it's important that it exists and is an option. But I would also like to turn a page and talk about some of the more exciting things coming up with regard to SeedSigner that have been percolating over the last few months and that are going to kind of continue to percolate into the end of this year and the beginning of next year. Probably the most important of which is multi-language support. And it's been something that SeedSigner has been lacking, and we've been aware of it for some time. But taking on full implementation of multi-language support is not like an architectural change in the software that we took lightly and wanted the feature set and the code base to be in the right place before we took that on. But Keith Mackay, who's our lead developer, launched an initiative 2-ish months ago to really, as I said, once the code base was in a certain place, it made sense to implement multi-language support we're going to start with a limited number of probably what you call easier to implement languages. So like Romance languages that have character sets that are similar to English, that operate in a left to right reading fashion, and that are based, that are alphanumerically based instead of pictorial character based. We're going to start with easy languages. I quote easy, like Spanish, Portuguese, French, German, each of which are important in certain parts of the world. Like Spanish is of course crazy important in South America, as is Portuguese, because a lot of people don't realize that Brazil and other countries, their primary language is in Portuguese. But one thing I didn't know was how important French language support is for parts of Africa, where French still is either the language that people may use on a day-to-day basis, or like the lingua franca of given areas, that is the language of commerce. But anyhow, being able to use SeedSigner in people's native language, I think, is an important piece to the puzzle, because SeedSigner as a tool itself teaches you about Bitcoin self-custody, and it teaches you about, because you're interacting directly with private keys. You're creating the private key, then you're creating the public version of the private key to set up your wallet. And then when you turn on the device, you want to sign a transaction, you need to import your private key. So SeedSigner users develop a very intimately personal appreciation for their private key and its importance, and the importance of keeping it secret. And being able to interact with our menus in their own native language just, I think, makes it that much easier for these concepts to resonate and click with them. So I'm very bullish on multi-language support. We already have kind of test pilot versions where it's running, but Keith Mackay, our, again, lead developer, is going to be attending the Adopting Bitcoin conference in El Salvador in the beginning of November, and he's hoping to have like a working release that can be demoed to people at that point, and that he can talk more about at the conference. So fingers crossed that it is on the near, if not at that conference, very soon thereafter, because most of the puzzle pieces are in place. It's just a matter of crossing T's and dotting I's.
That's amazing.
So multi-language support is something we're excited about. And then one of the primary complaints about SeedSigner, understandably, has been the size of the screen that we deal with. And it's been a challenge for our UI, UX implementation to be able to create screens that convey a lot of optionality and information using a tiny screen that is 240 pixels by 240 pixels. Our lead UI UX designer, he's a NIM who goes by the name Easy UXD, I believe. Yeah, Easy UXD on Twitter. Just made a presentation at the Atlanta Bitcoin conference this last week about his FOSS journey and what contributing to SeedSigner has been like, and the impact that he's been able to make, sharing so much of his skill and knowledge with us. Because the initial versions of SeedSigner were kind of like interacting with a computer at the terminal or the command line. It was a very basic user interface that did not convey a lot of information in a graphic way, and that wasn't very intuitive, and blah, blah, blah. So he's done so much. So anyhow, this small screen is a pain point, because some of the it's just hard to cram all this information on a tiny screen. And actually, the screen size is also important for how SeedSigner communicates with your device that talks to the Bitcoin network. Because with a larger screen, for people who aren't aware, with a larger screen, we can put more information more densely into, so it basically equates to less time holding your signer in front of your camera or holding your phone in such a way that it's recording the SeedSigner screen. So Keith and I have been working with a Dutch electrical engineer who's a super great Bitcoiner, we've already produced one prototype version of a SeedSigner with a larger screen. And we've made a few other tweaks to the device that people have asked for over time. We've added, instead of the current micro SD port that SeedSigner uses, we've switched to a USB-C port, which is just a cable that people tend these days to have more. They're more likely to have a USB-C cable laying around than they are to a micro SD cable. So it makes it a little more convenient that way. And there's a couple other tweaks that we've made with this design that just makes the device easier to work with and just a better user experience for people. So as I said, we have one PCB design that's a prototype that has been distributed to a few of our devs, and they're working with it. And I think we're going to go through a second PCB revision that implements I think we overshot it with the screen. We implemented a screen on this first PCB that's it's a little too large, because it makes the overall device probably a little more large than is convenient to hold in your hands. So we're kind of getting to that Goldilocks size of just right in the middle. And what's exciting about this is that after this design is finalized, along with everything else we do, this design will be open sourced. And so it'll be available for people who want to purchase this to build a SeedSigner themselves, or the design elements will be available for other people to produce their own runs of devices, or maybe even to make tweaks that they think make more sense. And so kind of similar to what they've done with BitX and the Open Source Miners United, we can maybe discover the ultimate form factor for a hat that works with a Raspberry Pi. And that leads into probably the last thing that I would mention is there's a reignited effort to create a reference design for a microcontroller-based stateless signing device that is itself, the hardware is fully open source. So not just the screen with the buttons, but the microcontroller implementation, the architecture for the device itself and the display and everything. There is a renewed interest that I'm excited about to create a new version of our code that is on the metal, so to speak. So it's going to be a lower level language that reduces the attack surface even more and that can run on even more low cost hardware to hopefully expand SeedSigner's reach such that, an organization like Me Premier Bitcoin, if they are implementing a Bitcoin education program in a school, and it would be helpful for them to have very low cost stateless signing devices to help teach kids how to do on-chain transactions and how on-chain Bitcoin works. We would love to get to the point where, it's at a point where this very simple computing device that is optimized for a very simple feature set can be produced for $10 or less, and to get these into as many people's hands as possible. So that was three things together, and I kind of rambled there, but those are the things that I'm excited and feeling blessed about, that it's not just all about gatekeeping and FUD. Like, there's some really exciting, innovative things going on with SeedSigner, and the project continues to grow and touch more Bitcoiners.
That's incredible. I mean, that was one of the questions that I got on X last night when I posted, to get the community to ask you some questions. And one of them was, what's next for SeedSigner? So I guess you got it right there. I was expecting like one little sneak peek into something that's going to happen. And you took us for a whole ride with three huge things. I guess just to quickly go over them, the first form factor of different languages, I think that is super important. It's needed because most people don't realize, even though English is the most spoken language in the world, but I think it's somewhere like in the region of 10 to 15% of the world actually speaks in English. Everything else is in different languages. And if you want to really cater to everybody, and especially people in kind of emerging markets, most of them probably never had English classes. They have no idea how to read or interact in English. So the fact that they can use it in their native language, I think, brings in a huge market of future SeedSigner builders and users, which is something phenomenal. And to be honest, I don't know how many other Bitcoin wallets offer in different, to my knowledge, from the ones I've used. Like, I haven't seen the option of changing language, and I think that's something that's kind of been missing. Everything's catered to this English-speaking demographic, so that's incredible news, and hopefully everything goes smoothly with it. As you said, I think it's the right thing to start with the easier languages and then go to more complex ones. But yeah, the other factor, which go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, as a real quick ancillary point, so if so few people in the world are speaking languages, they also access the internet and the Bitcoin network specifically more through a mobile device than they do sit down at a laptop or a desktop computer. And if I had to pick between the two, the user experience with SeedSigner is actually even better with a mobile phone. So it's so great to be able, we'll be able to reach these people where they are in terms of their language, but also with the internet device that they have, they're most likely to have accessible to them. So just wanted to throw that in.
And actually, by you throwing that in, Seed, you gave me an idea which kind of is a hypothetical answer to my previous question: why do so many people keep their coins on exchanges? Well, exchanges have different language options, so it makes it easier for them to interact in their own language. So maybe by SeedSigner being, offering different languages, maybe we will see, maybe not a huge leap, but more people, deciding, especially with the form factor pairing with the phone, taking custody of their keys. So maybe that's a factor. We'll see.
And maybe it's a catalyst. Maybe once again we lead the way for the commercial Bitcoin market. There have been at least a couple innovations that SeedSigner, I can't say we pioneered, but that we have popularized. Most effectively, this idea of a stateless signer that isn't intended to store private keys persistently is something that we weren't the first to do that, but I feel very comfortable saying that we were a big part of that concept being popularized, that it's now been implemented in several of the commercial hardware wallets. And the other thing was air gapping. We were not the first by any means to offer air gap, but I think the adoption of SeedSigner has really pushed the industry forward to start putting out more of these air gap solutions. Like Blockscreen Jade was initially released without QR exchanged or air gapped transfer of information being available, and they implemented it after they saw the degree of interest that SeedSigner was generating. And this may be controversial, but I think we might not have seen the cold card queue without SeedSigner having achieved the popularity that it did. I'm sure NVK would hate to hear that if he hears it, but I think that's a real thing. And so maybe with this multi-language support, if all of a sudden people in various parts of the world are excited about SeedSigner because they can interact with it with their native language, maybe the wallets that haven't leaned into that yet do. And I think that's, regardless of whether or not we get the credit we deserve, if we can push the industry forward, I think that benefits Bitcoiners and that benefits Bitcoin at large. And I think that's just something to be excited and proud about.
For sure, and you definitely collect some karma points, so that's always good. Yeah, giving out good things to the universe, and the universe rewards you just back.
Amen.
And the other thing which you mentioned about the screens, yeah, as you mentioned, the screen is not the largest of ones. It's definitely not grandma friendly. Your grandma would have a hard time signing her Bitcoin transaction on it. So maybe adding in a bigger screen would make sense. To me personally, like, I haven't seen any designs of the new prototype, but to me personally, like, this feels more, say, private, more discreet, because this is so much easier to hide at home than having like a big device.
Sure.
But who knows? People are different. People like different preferences. That's why Apple does an iPhone mini, and they do a Pro Max, which is like a phablet in your hand. So you got to cater to different demographics. And I'm always pro for giving people the choice, which actually, like, the dimensions of the SeedSigner haven't really evolved since the project was accepted. Yeah, it went from a plastic case to being a super premium product. I can't express how premium this feels. To be honest, I was thinking now, to my knowledge, there is no other Bitcoin hard wallet that's made in metal. Everything else is plastic, right? Do you know of any metal wallet signers apart from SeedSigner?
There may be some skins that you can apply to, say, like a cold card or something like that.
But nothing commercially comes out in metal.
Right. And that's, like, I can't overstate the contribution that he's been through a couple NIMs, so I hesitate to mention his name. But
we'll call him the designer
to our project, the super talented designer.
It is. And kind of just to not to babble on about it, but just I wanted to finish my thought on, people were making fun of SeedSigners, how it's like a child's toy in your hands, and you've kind of spanned the table around. Like, all other plastic Bitcoin wallets feel like a kid's toy, and now this feels like the real deal. But yeah, I mean, it's incredible. And what you've been doing for the industry, and freeing humankind, I praise you, Seed. I really see you as a close ally in the industry, and no matter what happens in the future, hopefully some sponsors come along to promote the show. But if there may be some hardware wallets, my contract will have a disclaimer that I have full freedom to praise SeedSigner, the project, because I really want to give back, because, open source and giving people the opportunity to take control of things into their own hands, and especially for a fraction of a dollar, is super important. So yeah, I want to once again praise you for everything you've done so far and everything that's coming. We should have more people like you in the industry, and it would be a much more prettier and healthier place.
Well, I'm indebted to you for that. Yeah, it's not just me, it is all of our contributors who frankly, like, give their time and expertise and skill away for the benefit of Bitcoin and other Bitcoiners. So I started the ball rolling, but there's so many hands after my clumsy initial first proof of concepting. But yeah, I appreciate that.
No, for sure. And the whole team gives in the most precious thing, which is time, right? Because that's one thing we can never make more of, and we can never take back. So there's no more effective giving that you can do than dedicating your time and energy towards something. And it's just incredible what you've done. And I'm really excited to see the new things coming out, and with the new features, with the languages, with the new prototypes. I'm super excited to hear that. I think it's a nice place to wrap it up. We got to leave some juice for the next time. I really like how this is going. maybe we'll do like an end of year annual chat with Seed to see what's happening in the SeedSigner
Check in
and the
with Seed.
Bitcoin ecosystem. Yeah, that's right. But Seed, just to those people who are yet hearing about SeedSigner for the first time, where's the best place to send the listeners to learn more? And perhaps if they want to get in touch with you personally, what's the best place to send them to?
The best place is SeedSigner.com. We're fortunate to own the .com domain. It's just the word seed and then the word signer. And from there, you can find our social accounts, the GitHub repo, where you can dig into technical information, download a release, or download models to print your own enclosure or templates for storing private keys. It's all there. It's all available, and we're happy for people to have access to it.
Amazing. Well, there you have it, guys. I think you got a lot of insightful value of what's happening with SeedSigner, what's happening in the space. Feel free to reach out, support the project, start building your own DIY Bitcoin wallets. And we look forward to having you back in the future, Seed, and Godspeed.
And I look forward to seeing how your project with the podcast progresses and what success you attain with it.
Thank you, Seed. Until next time.